Ladies and gentlemen, let's try gaming.com video. We're going to be discussing a recent interview with Microsoft's Albert Penello, in which, of course, he was discussing the digital future of the Xbox One, specifically family sharing, may make a comeback, and digital future of the system, and much more besides. So let's get on with it. He was asked, do you see a digital-only future someday happening? And he replied, yeah, it's going to happen. I don't think there's anybody in the industry, no matter what you thought about our original policies around DRM, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't know that someday it's going to happen. It's already happening on tablets and smartphones. It's mostly there on PC. And if you look what's happening on Steam, and just the congregation of gaming on Steam, it's already basically happened with music, and it's mostly happening to movies. So it doesn't take a big leap to say it's going to happen. It doesn't take a big leap to say it's going to get there. For us, we probably said it was going to happen too soon, and people weren't ready for it to happen. And I'm glad we've gone back to the disk model. People have to accept it. The internet bandwidth caps have to support it globally, and internet infrastructure has to support it globally. So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. End quote for just a moment. See, these are a couple of points that are pretty important. When he says that we're glad to go back to the disk-based model, I don't really think he's super glad about it, but this is a point where it's very, very open to debate. Some people in the UK, for example, and I know in the States and well as other countries, they'll have really fast internet. You know, you might have like 80, 100 megabit connections, maybe faster. In the UK, for example, there's talk about a couple of ISPs trying to go all the way up to 1 gigabyte per second connections. By no means is this the only country that's going to be doing that. There are, of course, others. On the other hand, there are also people with crummy internet connections, terrible internet connections. And this is one of the problems, of course, that even Sony have cited with the Gaikai technology in Europe. You get really fast internet connections, and then you get really crappy internet connections. And this is another reason that Microsoft are really keen to push the Azure technology in regards to dedicated servers. Anyway, moving on for just a moment with the interview. The interviewer asked about the prospect of reselling games. Specifically, that if you own a digital game, you can't resell it. And obviously there's no way for users themselves to trade in titles and so on. So Mr. Penello said, and I quote, I think if you go back and look at some of the things we said, that was one of the places we were actually trying to pioneer. We were trying to implement the ability to trade and loan digital games with your friends, which is something that no one else was doing. I believe in retrospect that people have calmed down and gone back and actually looked at what we said, and people are starting to understand, wow, they did want us to allow me to loan and trade, whereas other digital ecosystems don't want to do. And yeah, I think we need to do that. That has to be part of the experience. Right now, we're focused on launch, and we have switched the programs back to disk because that's what customers wanted. I get a lot of mail saying, God, please bring back the family sharing. We'd love to figure out how to bring it back. I still think it was a good idea. Maybe it was a little too soon for some people, but I still think there was a lot of good ideas in there. And we'll bring it back when the time is right. End quote for now. Microsoft were pretty open about the ideas for family sharing, and honestly, they got a lot of flack for the whole principle about the always online console. But I think the issues weren't the family sharing or the digital purchases. I think people were upset about that. I mean, for example, they never thought that they could create the Xbox One without the digital, without a traditional disk drive. It's just, most people, as we've said, most people's internet connections are crummy. Well, not most people, but a lot of people's internet connections are just crummy. In other words, they're not fast enough to download an 8 gig, 15 gig, 20 gig, 30 gig file. And if you think that doesn't sound realistic, 30 gig files, take a look at some PC games right now. PC's a pretty good analogy for consoles because of the size of the textures and so on of the PC versions. Oftentimes we'll have games that are pretty damn huge on PC. For example, just right-clicking and checking the size of Max Payne 3, which I've bought through Steam. It's about 30 gigs. And that's without any DLC. I've just bought the base game because I wasn't interested in any of the DLC, but whatever. And if you consider, that's pretty damn huge. And the whole reason, of course, of being so big is because of the various large textures, the engine, the sound effects, the movies, and whatever else it's going to be playing as the game progresses. So, there's no way that, for now anyway, we're going to have a console without a disk drive. But honestly, I don't think that anyone actually thought that family sharing was bad. I don't, at least anyone that I spoke to and the comments that I read, people were going really militant on the DRM issues. They didn't like the fact that you had to do the 24-hour check-in. They didn't like the fact that it felt kind of like a Big Brother type of situation. But they had no issues with the family sharing, and I think that's something that Microsoft have really taken on board. I think that it's smart of them to do so, actually. Now, I always said one of the really unfortunate things for Microsoft was they happened to announce a lot of these features within, well, a couple of weeks, really, of a lot of the NSA scandals starting to pop up. The NSA scandals and concerns over online privacy and so on. I mean, we're even talking about stuff like Facebook privacy, let alone, sending emails and whatever else, has been ongoing for a long time. But of course, the NSA scandals and the leaks and whatever else, they really helped to thrust it into the limelight. And so Microsoft unveiling the fact that, of course, the Xbox One's integration with the system, the fact that the system was always online and a lot more besides, people immediately cried foul, and it didn't really help much with the ties with, of course, Skype. So in the same interview, he was also asked about this, and the interviewer asked, or pointed out, that I know you could turn it off. I know you could even, for example, do stuff like point the camera away from you. I don't know why obviously it could still hear you before anyone points that out, but whatever. But since it's connected to the internet, people are always going to think that the government can have a backdoor to anything that's connected. What's Microsoft's take on this? And the reply was, this is a great one. The answer to this for us was very simple and everybody misinterpreted. Unplug it. Like originally, we'd said people who understand the technology behind this would quickly get to, if I have this 1080p camera that's always on, how is all of that data going to get off my machine? So first, it's somewhat implausible technologically that you would be able to have the high definition video feeds being served out of your house without you knowing about it. But that's just a pause on that for a second, and not everyone's technically savvy. We sort of felt that, of course, people are going to understand that's not going to happen. Some people don't understand it. It's just not a thing that people feel. So that's why we said, you know what? Just let people unplug it. If you really don't believe or are uncomfortable or whatever, you could just unplug it and then it's off. To your points, laptops, phones, security cameras are everywhere. If you believe this thing is happening, I know we're not going to do it. I'm not worried about it in my house because I know what's happening. But, we let people unplug it if they're super sensitive about it. I'm going to pause on this for a moment. Remember, Microsoft originally were somewhat going back on this because, to begin with, and this is something that a couple of people have pointed out, Microsoft originally said that Xbox One cannot function without Kinect. Now, I'm not saying that the system was designed with Kinect and, it does a check on whether Kinect's, turned on, so to speak, or whether it's plugged in. But we're talking about that the system physically was designed from the ground up with Kinect in mind, so without Kinect installed, it just would not operate, period, and there was nothing they could do about it. There's a couple of interviews that basically said this, and because people were asking Microsoft, can you just unplug it? And they said no. And now we have a complete turnabout. Of course, they're saying, well, you know what, you can unplug it, so they didn't really go and tell us the whole truth back then. People are pretty paranoid about this stuff right now. And although I've made my thoughts pretty clear, Miss Penello does have one point. The fact of the matter is, if you've got a laptop, if you have a smartphone even, I mean, most people don't think about this, but just for a moment, think about your Facebook feed. It doesn't have to be anyone particular, but just think about the activity of your friends on Facebook and think about how often you see them checking into a hotel or in a restaurant, or, for me, for example, it will be, Bob is at Times Square, London, or, they are popping into a hotel, somewhere down the road, or they've checked in at, Pizza Hut or whatever. It doesn't really matter. I'm just, making this up, but still, you know what I mean. And you'll see them all the time, or they'll tag themselves in photos at specific locations. In other words, it's not very difficult if you're someone that, actually cares about the activities of other people to really get an idea. If you really decide to study this, in depth, you could get an idea of basically where everyone hangs in on, because obviously it even appears on Facebook's maps. This is a massive issue, by the way. I absolutely hate about Facebook. The fact is, it's really difficult to sort out your privacy. It's really not simple compared to what it should be. They do say it's simple, but it's not. You really have to work on it. In other words, I'm not saying you can't, I'm just saying that it requires more effort than it should be, because a lot of people's stuff is just not secure, because, yeah. And when he's saying that people should know about the data of 1080p streams, well, kind of, but think of it this way. If you're already playing online, let's just say you're, gaming with, your friends on whatever game, it's kind of difficult to say, well, okay, I understand what this data is, but I don't understand what this data is. I mean, think about it. Would you really know? I mean, unless you did, real deep analysis to actually see what type of bandwidth is being used, it's pretty difficult to really know. I mean, obviously, if you're just chilling, but how do you know it's not game updates and so on? And for the most part, I mean, okay, if you're technically minded, you could probably figure it out. But if you're not technically minded, if you're just the average person, you won't know if it's a game update or whether it's, someone just spying on you all the way down to, voice chat or something. It's very difficult for the average person to know this, especially when you consider that the average person doesn't even have these things just, only one device plugged in. For example, you might have your system plugged in, your PC, I mean. You might have, say, your cell phone plugged on with wireless. You might have someone else in the house with another console or a laptop. In other words, you can have so much data going backwards and forwards, you can't really rely on, just simply looking at a blinking light. In other words, you have to do some analysis. And I think that's something that people did think about. Plus, you had other issues that they didn't necessarily think that it was going to be happening all the time. They didn't really think that people were going to be spying on you 24/7. I think that people were concerned about the possibility. And this is just something that was very hard for Microsoft to shake off. But of course, he does have a point. People were so transfixed on Microsoft's security issues, and I'm not saying they had security issues, I'm just saying that, people worried about it. But if you think about it, just for a moment, Microsoft were kind of like one of the issues in terms of potential security, but then you've got so many others. For example, viruses on your PC could, be keyloggers. Or you can have the same thing for laptops or smartphones or whatever. There were so many different issues. I mean, I think it's just kind of silly to me that people were so worried about Microsoft, yet they don't start thinking about all this other potential issues that you can possibly have. But as I said at the particular time, I think it's a case of, look, Microsoft, I think they handled it fairly well towards the end when they started to admit the issue rather than trying to brush it under the carpet. I think that was the big issue to begin with. Now, before we sign off and close off the video, I'd like to talk about one other major point. And this is something dependent on the cloud structure. Now, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the cloud is going to be very important with the Xbox One. Microsoft, of course, are pointing out that it's very important for, say, cloud computing in terms of, say, physics and so on. Others are using it for things such as dedicated servers. Others are using it for AI, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so there was a question raised is as things become more independent on the cloud nature of thing, or dependent, I'm sorry, on the cloud nature of things, it seems very dependent on Microsoft and staying in business and staying very interested in gaming. There is a response, of course. I think it's a great question in the industry because I could point to the fact that there are still plenty of games on Xbox One and 360 that are total offline mode. You could ask the same question for World of Warcraft, like someday, what happens if Blizzard turns off the Switch? Where's all my money? Where's everything? That's a great question the industry is going to face. And there's going to be game dependent, end quote. See, I think one of the concerns that people had was always on the requirement was just that. People were concerned that, you know what about if Microsoft just decide to have, just basically switch off the authentication servers? What about if there's an issue and Xbox Live goes down or the authentication servers get hit with like a DDoS attack or something like that? And, they're inaccessible for 7 days, because you can imagine someone doing that. What about if, a game that relies on cloud technology, what about if those servers get turned down? And this is a huge issue. This is something I've discussed in depth, actually, in my cloud-based technology videos in the last couple of days. And it's kind of a tricky situation, because think about it. If you're a games developer, if you're a games publisher, how long could you support a particular server? But he's right. People are really fixed on the Microsoft side of things, but it does really translate to other developers and other games as well. Like, we've just gotten word that Tekken Tag Tournament 2, a lot of the modes now, several of the modes, online modes such as replays, for example, are now bye-bye. In other words, they physically do not work. If you go to the options, or if you go to the options in the menus and you try to select them, it'll just basically say, buddy, that's not going to happen. Why? Because, well, the game's developer, Namco, decided this is no longer profitable. We are basically pissing away money trying to run a service, and we're not making enough from it. In other words, the game got to the point where it was no longer profitable, it was no longer viable to keep the servers up and running. And so, what happened? Well, now, a lot of the modes that you were enjoying, such as the replay features, just for example, no longer function. They'll just say, sorry, you forgot to say the magic word. In other words, they simply will no longer work or no longer go forward. And this is just analogous. It's just going to be happening for a long time, and I don't think there's a particular answer at the moment that anyone's really thought of that's going to resolve the situation. I'd also like to point out that in regards to the World of Warcraft situation, it's very true. I mean, I know people who, for example, had their account banned on WoW. And yes, a lot of the times the bans were deserved. In other words, they were trolling, they were, using bots to farm, they were doing whatever the hell they were doing, and they were subsequently banned for a period of time or forever. So in other words, they may be issued like a 48-hour ban. If it was like, a small exploit they were using, it could be like a 7 or 48-hour, a 7 or a 28-day ban if it was something like a small botting incident or griefing in PvP or whatever, all the way down to, well, you know what, your account has had multiple violations, we are going to ban your account. And of course, because they are reliant, in other words, because your game is basically just a client based on their servers, and you're effectively paying for access to those servers, bye-bye goes your game. In other words, all those characters you've worked really, really hard for, they go bye-bye. And it's not just World of Warcraft, of course, this is the same for tons of games. Everything from Guild Wars all the way down. And so, pretty much most of Blizzard games are the same thing. StarCraft 2, for example, if your game gets banned and if your progress goes, you're no longer able to play and you have to either fork out for another account or something similar. But I think people are going to become increasingly more aware of this stuff, and I think people are becoming more aware of it anyway. I am really happy that the family sharing is coming back, though. I think that's actually one of the coolest features about the Xbox One, and it was actually one of the things that I really did like about the Xbox One. I mean, there are a couple of other nice features about it, but that was one of the features I thought, this is actually pretty cool. It was kind of completely and utterly buried, however, under the restrictions of the DRM. And Microsoft, of course, are very happy to point out that, well, you know what, so we were right all along then. Sort of. But then you've got to remember that they're very happy to point to Steam and how Steam is doing all this, very similar stuff to Microsoft. But the difference is Steam can play in offline mode, and of course there are certain games where, if you want to play COD on multiplayer, you're going to need to be online. But at the same time, hey, at least you've got the option to play the single player offline. This was a massive issue. Finally, there are other service providers right now, such as Origin, which are going to be offering refunds for games if they are first-party games. In other words, if you buy a EA game, you will be able to get a refund on Origin, and I think that's pretty damn awesome as well. Anyway, this has been a bit of an itsy-bitsy video. Hopefully you found it somewhat informative / entertaining at the very least. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.